Welcome to the discussion of anthropology, right? And how many of you saw the paper? How many of you have seen the paper? Everybody has seen? Yes. And hope it doesn't appear alien to us now. Okay. Now, general comment on anthro paper. I would say paper 2 was moderate. Why was it moderate? Not very analytical, rather it is more direct. But when you look at paper 1, to a larger extent I would say paper 1 was more conceptual, that's one. And this conceptual nature of paper 1 made it unusual, right? Now, because what has happened with respect to anthropology as a subject in the recent past, everybody is relying on Topper's notes too much. Now, you see, be it Laghima Tiwari or be it Apala Mishra or be it Vivek Basmai or be it Akshat Jain. The problem is, you are too much dependent upon these Topper's notes. Now, whenever you are reading this Topper's notes, the biggest problem that you would face is you do not know what is the background story, you do not know what is the overall understanding. And you think that anthropology, by adding some content, you can go and write an answer. Now, that is where you see a gap that is existing with respect to paper 1 and what are you writing there, what you are reading is very different. Because people have taken anthropology very lightly. And UPSC came back very strongly. That when you look at paper 1 is meant for that person who has overall general knowledge and not only general dimension, but you also have overall interlinkages. Now there are multiple such questions which I would keep indicating as we progress. And the agenda of this particular class is I would not be discussing whole answer or neither I would be reading out the PDF. My agenda and the main focus is, I would talk about various structures and I would talk about what is the kind of value addition that you can bring in that particular question. Because the rest of the content anyway, most of you should be acquainted with. Now, when you look at the first question, it is talking about Mendelian and non-Mendelian traits. That's the first question. Now, what is the broad structure that you can remember or that you can definitely apply in the exam hall? Is define what is Mendelian characteristic feature and define what is non-Mendelian characteristic feature. And once you talk about the basic definition of Mendelian and non-Mendelian, the next part of your answer should be, you should be writing the difference between Mendelian and non-Mendelian. Because when you look at Mendelian characteristics, you would have the 4 different dimensions, that is the law of unit factor, law of inheritance, right? Law of independent assortment. Those are, whichever are satisfying these Mendelian laws are Mendelian characteristic features. And mostly what? You see that Mendelian traits are monogenic characteristic features to a larger extent. That means one gene determining the other trait. But whereas when you look at non-Mendelian characteristic features, mostly it is polygenic, mostly it is codominance and incomplete dominance, mostly it is epigenetics, mostly it is genetic polymorphism. All of these are non-Mendelian traits and non-Mendelian characteristic features. So you would talk about what is Mendelian, non-Mendelian, then differences, then what is the composition of this. You will not have any scope to explain all of this. Then immediately you will have to talk about the examples for Mendelian and examples for non-Mendelian. And where is the major application that you see for all of this? The major application that you see in the understanding of concepts of race and racism. Because whenever you see any race, whenever you look at the syllabus, you see criteria for race, morphological, non-morphological, serological. Whenever you're talking about all of this, you always have to remember, it is not Mendelian, but rather it is non-Mendelian, which is dependent upon the polygenic inheritance. So that dimension of it should be brought in whenever you're discussing about Mendelian and non-Mendelian. You have certain things which are being brought out from 9.6 chapter, 9.5 chapter, because 9.5 is race and racism, 6 is genetic markers, and straight away bringing it 9.2 and 9.3. That is what is this particular question centered around. And the biggest value addition in this question is what are the characteristic features that are generally seen in non-Mendelian aspect. Okay? That's a simple, straightforward question, I would say. Theoretical significance of Puram kinship system. Right? Now just imagine you're seeing this question in the exam hall and it happens to be your second question. Now when it happens to be your second question, everybody is focused on this. But I would say focus should be on significance aspect. Now in general, when you see Puram kinship system, it is related to Northeast. Especially it's a system which is followed in Manipur. Right? In general conventional anthropology studies, we don't do this. I would say don't be boggled by that, because the major focus is they're not asking about Puram kinship system, but they're asking about significance. Don't you think you can write significance of any kinship system? Basic understanding, I can simply say what is the significance of kinship system with respect to marriage, with respect to kinship terminologies, with respect to kinship groups, with respect to family, with respect to the economic systems. I can simply write a general answer. Now please understand, these questions are not meant for troubling you. These are meant for looking at your presence of mind. If they wanted to ask you, don't you think they could have asked you just simply Puram kinship system if they wanted to know about Puram kinship system? But they are rather asking you about significance of kinship. Right? So you can express in this particular dimension with respect to kinship. Now, always remember, my dear, when you are writing significance of anything in socio-cultural, ensure that you are using your syllabus paper. What are you using with your syllabus paper? You see forms of kinship, types of kinship, kinship terminologies and kinship theories. This is what is your 2.5, that is kinship chapter. So bring in those dynamics whenever you are writing it. And that's more important when you look at some question like this. I would say that is a tough question, but if you are able to manage, it's easy. Now when you look at the third question, osteo-odonto-keratocultures, we call them as ODK cultures. And what are these ODK cultures? It is majorly talking about the Australopithecus. Now Australopithecus are known to have ODK culture because what is seen to be happening in the rest of the evolutionary Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Neanderthal, Homo sapien, Homo sapien sapien. Most of this evolution has happened across Paleolithic. Most of it evolution has happened Paleolithic. That means there was one thing which was existing in pre-Lithic culture, and in pre-Lithic culture there was only ODK cultures which were existing, which is Australopithecus. And they're specifically talking about what? And its makers. And its makers means Australopithecus. And what is ODK culture? It is focusing upon the bones, focusing upon the teeth, and focusing upon the hair. Keratocultures. And most of their tool technology was centered around this osteo-odonto-keratocultures. And what are you supposed to, what should be your structure here? Introduction, you will describe what is ODK culture. And in the intro itself, you will tell ODK culture is related to whom? It is related to Australopithecus any given day. And once you talk about that Australopithecus, then get into talking about what is the geographical distribution. Mostly it is concentrated with respect to what? The African region. Mostly concentrated with African region. And you know, one very, very famous, you see LSB Leakey, Richard Leakey, Mary Leakey, the Leakey family there. They are very, very well known for these cultures. So you can talk about the geographical distribution, then you can talk about the basic characteristic features, and then talk about what? What is their significance in the evolutionary studies? What is their significance in the evolutionary studies should have been written in this particular question. Always remember, whenever you are writing a question on 1.5 and 1.6, you please remember, you are definitely talking about evolutionary significance when you are writing your answer. You don't do that, you are not writing that answer. Right? So that is one more specific thing that you need to remember whenever it comes to this osteo-odonto-keratocultures. In fact, many people struggled, my dear. Now, smell as a signal among non-human primates. Because when you look at primates, you know it is what? It is majorly ape, monkey, prosimian, human. And these are considered to be what? These are considered to be non-human primates. That has to be made clear when you are writing this particular answer. Now, once you make that particular point clear when you are writing this particular answer, one thing is very definite that you have to remember, that how is smell becoming a signal? Now, when you look at the characteristic feature here, you see there is something called as rhinopallium. There is something called as neopallium. And all of these are seen to be existing in conflict with the cognitive abilities. Now you see, either vision is fully developed, or either the smell is fully developed, or either the cognitive abilities are fully developed. You always see that all these three are going to be existing in conflict. Now when I say smell as a signal was more prevalent in non-human primates but not human primates. And in this context, in what all dimensions is it acting as a signal? It could be a signal with respect to the mating activity. It could be a signal with respect to the territorial activity, right? That means it could be a signal with respect to grooming activity. It could be a signal with respect to the locomotory action. All of this. Now they are fundamentally asking you that how smell is fundamentally existing in the social behavior of whom? Your social behavior of primates. That is part of your syllabus. So you have to talk about this dimension. Smell as a signal will have some impact with respect to the social behavior of primates. And whenever you are writing a chapter of primates, ensure that you are concluding this answer with something called as a primate continuum. When we say primate continuum, what is seen to be happening with respect to primate continuum? It's very simple. That primate continuum means what? The culture is seen to be emerging with the primate, and it is seen to be evolved as it reaches the human stage. And that is the simple conclusion, I would say, simple yet profound whenever you are writing any answer on primates. So primate continuum what? When it was with primates, it was very rudimentary in nature, it was very simple in nature, it was very basic in nature. But as it progressed towards human, what has happened? The culture has evolved, developed, it got more civilized in nature. That should have been your conclusion when you are writing this particular question. Smell as a signal among human primates. Next, culture and embodiment. Now UPSC is just playing around with words. All these are present in your syllabus. The problem with most of you who are preparing for anthropology, you have taken anthropology for granted, one, and you are depending too much upon toppers notes. Toppers notes, that was for that year. But you have to understand anthropology as a subject is very dynamic today. And why are people struggling with paper 1 or paper 2 in anthropology when you have too much of rigid understanding of anthropology? And that should be remembered here. Now when you look at culture and embodiment, who is embodiment of culture? The human being. Who is embodiment? Human being. And they are simply asking you culture as an organic entity. When you are writing the characteristic features of culture in 2.1, you would say culture is organic and super organic, you write no. But the culture is organic, it is what is being asked as culture and embodiment. That means what are they asking you? What are the characteristics of culture? What is it present with respect to culture and the human relation? What is the culture and the human relation? You see, various cultural as well as various attitudes are studied with respect to these various forms of cultural change or cultural progression. That could be acculturation, transculturation, enculturation, contraculturation, resocialization, socialization, everything. It is just asking about culture as an organic entity. Culture is the one which is created by human being. What is Hertzkowitz's understanding of culture? Hertzkowitz's understanding of culture is nothing but culture is the man-made part of the environment. That is the point which is being asked. right? So if you write that, I think that should be sufficient with respect to this particular question. This was a tough question, I would say. I would say this is definitely a tough question any given day, because you writing a 20 marker on this question is not very easy. Now when you look at this particular question, what are they asking you? They're asking you Miocene hominids remains and their significance in the evolution. Now most of us do not know who are these Miocene or Miocene hominids, right? You see, there are three different phases: early, middle, late, right? Just like early Paleolithic, middle Paleolithic, late Paleolithic, we also have early, middle and late. Now, who is one person who is one pre-consul is one, right? Then here in middle, it is Dryopithecus. And what is in late? You see Ramapithecus and Shivapithecus that you study as part of the paleo-archaeological evidences in Shivalik Hills in 1.2, in paper 2. That is the late. And here you will have to be describing about what are the basic characteristic features, all of this. Right? So what is the structure whenever you are writing this answer? Majorly it is the geographical distribution. Majorly it is the time period that they were existing in. You will talk about what are the characteristic features of whatever fossils which were found. Then you will talk about what is their phylogeny that is seen to be existing, because most of the Miocene hominids or hominoids have a conflicting phylogeny which is existing. It is inconclusive in nature. Although Lewis talks about a lot of conclusionary remarks on their fundamental phylogeny, but it is not very conclusive. So talk about the phylogeny and then talk about the evolutionary significance that is existing. That is how you write this particular structure. This is a tough question. I would say if you don't know who is Miocene hominoid, please don't choose this particular question. It is definitely not to be chosen any given day. Next. You see, this is a simple, straightforward question. Compare and contrast the symbolic of Gifford, Geeds and Turner. Simple structure is what you simply write what is the premise for both. The premise for both of them is what? They see that culture is nothing but a set of symbols which are seen to be existing. And every symbol has a respective interpretation. This is what is the basic premise. And what is seen to be happening whenever you are comparing and contrasting two thinkers, be it in the functionalism when you talk about Malinowski and R.C. Brown, be it in structuralism with respect to Levi-Strauss as well as Edmund Leach, be it Turner or Geeds, be it Conklin or Tyler, any of these. The first thing that you have to understand is what is their conceptual understanding. The conceptual understanding of Turner is what? Ritual symbolism. Turner was talking about ritual symbolism. Turner was talking about the symbols as means of social transformation. But whereas when you look at Geeds was talking about what? Cultures or symbols are vehicles of culture. That is spoken by whom? Geeds. So discuss about the basic conceptual differences which are existing. And once you discuss about the conceptual differences, see what kind of methodology is being used. When you look at the methodology, mostly the focus of the Turner was on communitas. Mostly the focus was on the social drama. Mostly the focus was on a liminality when it comes to Turner. But when you look at Geeds, what was the major focus? The major focus was with respect to the thick description. Majorly with respect to the hermeneutics which was seen. All of this to be written with respect to Geeds. Then discuss about what is their field work. You see the field work of whom? Field work of Turner is with respect to Endembu society, Madai tree, Mukanda ceremony, the instrumental symbols, the representative symbols, the meaningful symbols. All of this was spoken. And when you talk about Geeds, you see for Geeds the field work was, what was the field work? Balinese, cockfight, Javanese, face mask. Right? You see, these two are the fieldworks with respect to Geats. Then talk about what are the observations made, and then see what is the anthropological significance of understanding culture when you look at the interpretation of Geats and Turner. What is the commonality in both? What do you think is the commonality in both? The commonality in both of them is what? They had a phenomenological understanding. They had a phenomenological understanding of culture. When we say phenomenological understanding of culture, for them, the priority was the individual's reality rather than the societal setup. For them, the priority was individual reality rather than the societal setup. That is a commonality. Because this shift started happening after culture personality school. Till culture personality school, mostly it was what? Mostly it was positivist kind of approach where they have valued society more than individual. But after culture personality school, be it cognitive, be it postmodernist, be it symbolic and interpretative, they were valuing individual more than society, and that is what is non-positivism, and that is what is called as phenomenological understanding. So that is what is to be written, and that you can bring in. And finally, you will have to conclude with what module? You will have to conclude with criticism. Right? Any thought, thinker question will have this structure. Premise, concept, methodology, fieldwork, observations, significance, criticism. Next. How is political economy integrated with ecological and adaptability perspectives in biocultural anthropology? Now, if you look at this question, you see question is very tough. But this question is another way of asking a neo-evolutionism. That's all. And who in neo-evolutionism? The Solon's and Survey's understanding of general and specific evolution. And the other interpretation of Solon's and Survey's is with respect to what? The other interpretation of Solon's and Survey's is with respect to biocultural approach of understanding culture. That is what is supposed to be written here. And you will make a passing reference with respect to what? Ecological and adaptability means culture, ecology approach of whom? Julian H. Stewart. That is what is supposed to be written here. Right? Otherwise, now what many people started doing is looking at this particular question and they started telling anthropology is tough. Anthropology is not tough. It's a problem with you. The problem with you is what? Very narrow approach, very rigid approach, and you start preparing in silos. Right? And you say, no, I am the master of anthropology. The problem is, have the broader understanding. This is again a question from neo-evolutionism. That's what I told you. Okay. Next. I would say this is one of such classics from UPSC again. Now when you look at this particular question, how do anthropologists assess the nutritional status of a community? Right? Now what do? We will start writing general studies. They will look at protein levels, they would look at carbohydrate level, they would do blood test. All of those tests are not needed. If you write like that, you will have to get them done after the result. Pakka. They are simply asking about growth studies. Growth studies. What happened in growth studies? You have longitudinal, you have cross-sectional, you have mixed method. That is how they stick. And not only that, they are talking about what material? They are talking about somatotyping. Somatotypes depending upon whether the person is 117 or 171 or 711, you will be able to understand what is the nature of nutritional composition that is existing. And they are also talking about anthropometry. Measurements. Based upon that, you are able to assess what is the nutritional status. For you, nutrition here is what? Majorly protein, majorly carbs, majorly the lipid or the fat composition which is existing. That is major composition that is to be seen when you talk about the nutritional status. Then discuss the significance of Such a beautiful question. It is talking about intersectionality of what? Ecology, culture, and social inequality. If you go back and refer to the first line of the 10th chapter, 10th chapter is on growth and development, and when you see the 10th chapter, you would see there is something like factors of growth. And in that you would see cultural factors, ecological factors, and social factors. That is the question. And one definite passing reference that you will have to make in this answer is you will definitely have to talk about the channel theory which is spoken here. When you look at channel theory, in the channel theory you have the concept of gatekeepers for the nutrition. And women are considered to be the gatekeepers of nutritional status of a particular society. Because women decide what is to be cooked, what is to be eaten in a particular society. And we say that you are able to manage the gatekeepers, you are able to channelize the system, you will be able to understand what is the nutritional status of a particular society. Bring in those factors. You look at, whenever they are talking about ecological aspect, bring in that in various different environmental stress, how is the dietary pattern changing? Now you see Andean population, Andes mountains population, that population is seen to be consuming a specific leaf. You look at Tibetan population. Now what is seen to be happening? Depending upon the ecology, depending upon the availability, you have these existing. And definitely you will have to make a passing reference to epidemiological transition. Why epidemiological transition? Maybe be it the age of pestilence, or be it the age of transition, or be it the age of pandemics, or be it the age of lifestyle diseases, or whatever it is. In this you will definitely see, as the nutrition status keeps changing, the disease profile of the society also keeps changing. So you will definitely have to talk about the Omran's understanding of epidemiological transition. Now once you discuss about that, one addition that you can definitely bring in is, how is it useful in maintaining the health of the tribal population? So that can be brought in as an interlinkage whenever you are talking about this particular question. Next, critically examine the drawbacks in assuming culture as an integrated closed system in understanding of contemporary society. Right? ఇలాంటి పదాలు చూసినప్పుడు అప్పుడప్పుడు ఏం చేయాలో అర్థం కాదు. Fundamentally, one biggest problem that we see is integrated closed system. What does that mean? That is simply talking about ethnocentrism and cultural, because those are the challenges in studying a culture. Now they have reframed this particular, critically examine the drawback in assuming culture as an integrated closed system in understanding of contemporary society. What are the major challenges in studying culture? Major challenges in studying culture is ethnocentrism, cultural relativism. And you also see certain culturally regressive understandings will also fundamentally affect your understanding on culture. And that is what is to be written in this particular question. Now again you read this in its syllabus, what you would have added, ethnocentrism, cultural relativism, vis-a-vis human rights, finish. But if I give you a heading saying that these are the challenges in understanding culture, that is nothing but the question which is asking you, right? So please understand, my dear, that anthropology is no more direct, and anthropology is no more topper's notes, and anthropology is no more simple. Anthropology will demand broader understanding and comprehensive understanding. Differentiate between pedigree and genealogical analysis. Discuss the history and applications of these two methods in anthropological studies. Now this is a question directly linked to 8th chapter, fieldworks. Now what is the basic understanding? Pedigree is for biological purpose and genealogical is for socio-political purposes. Genealogical studies are meant for socio-political purposes, and whereas when you see pedigree, it is meant for biological purposes. That is there. and discuss the history and application of these methods. That means you will have to talk about pedigree. What is it meant for? It is meant for man family studies to a larger extent. 9.1. And genealogy is meant for what? The genealogy is majorly meant for the kinship studies. It is meant for the political anthropology. It is meant for understanding the systems of family. 2, 3 applications here and there you will be able to happily mention between the pedigree and genealogical analysis. Right? And then you know who is the person whom are you going to definitely talk about when you look at pedigree analysis? Francis Galton. Whom are you going to definitely talk about when you're talking about genealogical studies? W.H.R. Rivers and his study on Thoda society. So because these two people are definitely to be mentioned whenever you're writing this. Okay. Next. You see, anthropology provides a multi-dimensional understanding of human beings by bridging the gap between science and humanities. Examine or elucidate. Now, problem with you is what? You don't have notes on 1.2 of paper 1. And when you don't have notes on 1.2, you will think that this question is from 1.2. But I would say this question is not from 1.2, rather it is talking about branches of anthropology. What are the branches of anthropology? Socio-cultural, linguistic, physical, archaeological. And when I am studying socio-cultural, I will definitely compare this with history. I will definitely compare this with sociology. Yes, when I am studying with respect to physical anthropology, I will study with respect to medicine. What is the general difference between any discipline and anthropology? There are 3-4 constant differences that you see. This is holistic study. This is part study. This is studying the social, biological and culture, but this is only studying one of those 3. This is majorly what? When you look at anthropology, it studies about past, present and future. This only studies about the present. This is studying about the primitive societies as well as the modern societies. This is only studying about modern societies. Simple understanding. This is seen to be having both scientific and non-scientific approach, but this is only seen to be having scientific approach. Either of them will be there. Are you understanding this dimension? That is what we see in anthropology. What are the characteristic features of anthropology? It has comparative analysis. It has a holistic study. It has scientific study. It has phenomenological understanding. It has diachronic and synchronic approach. It has emic and etic perspective. It has participant observation. All of these are what? Advantages of anthropology. And you should be able to write all of this in this particular answer, because this is a combination of 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3. They are asking this question. And the easiest way to structure is compare with branches of anthropology. Right? When you are comparing archaeological, you will compare with earth sciences. You will compare with geology. That's the simplest structure that you can follow whenever you are writing this particular question. So that is the understanding here. Okay. Next. Another question that you see. Write a note on Mousterian tool tradition, Mousterian culture and its makers. Now UPSC is highly obsessed with these makers. Now what is happening? Mousterian, it is dealing with what? It is majorly dealing with the Middle Paleolithic. And when you see this Middle Paleo, in Paleo, you see, right, early, middle, and you can say this is upper. And in this also what? You see, later phase and early phase. Within that, here who is characterized? Homo habilis. Who is here? Homo erectus. In Middle Paleolithic, it is Neanderthal. In Upper Paleolithic, it is who? Homo sapien. You see different tool traditions existing in paper 2. We have Upper Paleolithic cultures. Right? You see Aurignacian, Magdalenian, Saulitrian, Gravitian. All of these are what different kinds of cultural which are existing around the Upper Paleolithic. Now when we say Middle Paleolithic, it is nothing but the Mousterian tool technology, which is nothing but who are the makers of that? Neanderthals. They are asking you a question on Neanderthal. Now the problem here is again very simple. You would have by-hearted about Neanderthal and you would not have studied and paid attention about Mousterian tool tradition. Mousterian tool tradition, Levalloisian tool tradition, Clactonian tool tradition, Aurignacian, Gravettian, Magdalenian. All of these are what different kinds of tool traditions where you see the technology involved with making the tool, we see these tool traditions. And that is what is seen to be happening in this particular question. All that you are supposed to write is what? The geographical expanse. You are supposed to write the time period. And not only the geographical expanse and the time period, you are supposed to write the characteristic features. You are supposed to write the evolutionary significance. That is the easiest part that you can remember when it comes to this particular dimension. Next. So anthropology is not what you think, but rather UPSC simply changed the matter of it. Okay. Critically examine James Fraser's theory of evolutionism, elucidate the place of religion in modernity. Now what are they asking you? They are asking you the evolutionary perspective on James Fraser is belonging to whom, idiot? Classical evolutionists. His major studies were what? Major studies were magic, religion and science, the golden buff. His major studies was totemism and taboo. His major studies was totemism and exogamy. Majorly. That is what is his understanding of James Fraser, and he was inspired from what? Notes and Queries, which was written by whom? E.B. Taylor. His theories and E.B. Taylor's theories will be very similar because he is inspired from E.B. Taylor's studies of Notes and Queries. And when you look at the place of religion in the modernity, it is talking about what? It is simply talking about the William Bryson's understanding of a secularization of religion. William Bryson's understanding of secularization of religion, and when we say the secularization of religion, what is the sacred elements becoming more secular and secular elements becoming more sacred? And we don't see a clear demarcation between sacred and profane. That is why there is a very, very famous line of Immanuel Durkheim where he says that religion would never go extinct, but rather the old gods diminish and the new gods emerge. And the new gods here need not be sacred alone, but they can also be secular in their consideration. That is what is, they are talking about elucidate the place of religion and modernity, right? And if you still want to link it with paper 2, bring in the relevance with respect to sacred complex. What is happening in the sacred complex? In the sacred complex, you see, there is a concentric arrangement around the sacred places. From the center, when you move away, what is seen to be happening in traditional studies of LP Vidyarthi, or you look at, who is that person? Makanja, right? Any of these studies, you look at Cora Dubois' study with respect to Odisha temple, Bhubaneswar. Any of these studies, what do you observe when you move from the center to away, the sacredness is seen to be decreasing. But today itself we see that there is no clear demarcation here. It can be such that certain secular elements are present somewhere at the core of the complex. And what is happening? That is purely the impact of modernity which is existing there. So that could be discussed. So you're talking about how is the understanding changing when it comes to anthropology, when it comes to the religion. Next. You see, multi-species, multi-sited and critical ethnography. They're simply asking about what? They are asking about the field work. In that also they are talking about ethnography. In that also they are talking about participant observation. In that also they are talking about emic perspective. In that also they are talking about issues. When you look at issues, there is a problem of reflexivity. There is a dimension of objectivity. And you also see the Hawthorne effect which is experienced in any of the fieldwork studies. That is the core center of the question which is being asked. That is why they are saying multi-species, multi-sited. What do you mean by multi-species, multi-sited? It is about multiple dimensions, which is making it very inclusive, which is making it very participant in nature rather than non-participant. They are talking about participant, which is mostly what? Emic perspectives or etic perspectives? Emic perspective. And that is what is the question talking about. Now again, what are they playing? They are playing on words. Critical ethnography means what? You are looking at the positive dimensions, negative dimensions. You are looking at benefits of ethnography, negatives of ethnography. What is the difference between ethnography and ethnology? When you look at ethnology, ethnology is more of comparative. Ethnography is more of what? Detailed understanding. And can I say, this multi-species, multi-sited critical ethnography is nothing but the methodology of case study. What do we do in case study? Single, detailed, deeper studies is what are done in case study, and that is what is to be discussed in this particular understanding. Right? Next. That is what I am telling you, my dear. They are simply playing on words, nothing else here. Evolutionary significance of menopause. Somebody who has read my notes directly, you would see a dictation on evolutionary significance of menopause. I can confidently challenge saying that hardly 10% of the people will have notes on evolutionary significance of menopause. Now there are fundamentally two different theories which are put. One is the ovarian bomb theory. The other one is the parthenogenesis avoidance theory. Right? You would see the detailed being discussed in this particular model answer. You can check that. Right? Now again, when will you get all of these understandings? You would only get when you have a deeper and wider study which is done with Anthro. Next. Now, fission track dating method and its application. It is nothing but what? Uranium dating. Even if you don't know uranium dating, what is fission? Fission is something which is related to nuclear metal or material. When nuclear material, what is happening? We only read about uranium dating to a larger extent. And is it absolute dating method or relative dating method? It's an absolute dating method. And what are the applications of absolute dating method? Majorly it is having archaeological applications, majorly it could have certain physical applications, and majorly it could also have cultural applications. To be very specific, the ethno-archaeological applications. You discuss about this ethno-archaeological applications, evolutionary applications, archaeological, all of these are very common. But you should be able to decipher this in the example. Because you see, you will study 5-6 different absolute techniques. One is carbon dating, potash-argon dating, uranium dating, thermoluminescent methodology. All of these are absolute methods. And in that you should be able to decipher this, that they are going to decipher the timeline dependent upon the half-life of this uranium. That is what is done. That is what is the methodology which is followed. Mitochondrial DNA and human evolution. Right? Mitochondrial DNA and human evolution. What is happening here? I don't know how many of you have read these particular studies, that when you look at that Neanderthal, what was happening, we see there is 4% similarity which is seen to be existing in the evolutionary line. And that 4% studies happened only on the basis of mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is used to decipher what is the phylogeny, it is used to understand the evolutionary position. And not only that, you would also see mitochondrial DNA is very important in understanding the biogenetic variability of tribes. 6.1, paper 2. 6.1, paper 2, you have biogenetic variability of tribes, and this is a very, very important marker which is present. In fact, D.M. Majumdar has done some basic understandings of mitochondrial DNA and its applications in biogenetic variability of Indian tribes. That is there. Right? So that has to be discussed in this particular answer whenever you talk about mitochondrial DNA. Now again, these concepts you will not get in topper's notes, my dear, because topper's notes is very limited. That is the fundamental aspect that you need to remember. Fetal origin of adult diseases and contributions of David Baker. The fundamental problem in this question is, remember who is David Baker? Yes? Now should you bother about David Baker here? Don't bother about David Baker, simply talk about fetal origin. At least you are answering the question for 5 marks. Why? Because David Baker, it is definitely a tough business when you are writing the exam. Right? Outside the post-mortem analysis can be done, but David Baker is not very famous thinker when you talk about physical anthropology. Any given day. Right? Rather, we could see Davis and Murray, they are famous. Right? Kingsley Davis, they are famous. But David Baker is not so famous when I talk about this. And what do you mean by fetal origin of adult diseases? They are talking about chromosomal abnormalities. They are talking about chromosomal abnormalities, which is what, my dear, which is nothing but 9.4 chapter. And what are the contributions made by David Baker? If you want to just quickly run through. He majorly emphasized upon what? The maternal nutrition. And what is seen to be happening, you have to understand. When you look at the stages of growth, one factor which is affecting growth is the environmental factor. And when you look at this environmental factor which is affecting the growth, one environmental factor which in fact none of your twin and co-twin studies considers is intrauterine environment. When you look at twin studies and co-twin studies or foster child studies, what are they focusing upon? They are focusing upon what is the composition of genes and environment. And most of their studies with respect to what? Heritability, that is Vg by Vg plus Ve. What is the variability with genes and what is the variability with genes and environment? What is the criticism of twin and co-twin is they have not considered intrauterine environment as a condition. And David Baker has done a lot of studies on intrauterine studies and how is this intrauterine environment being determined by majorly what? Maternal nutrition. You would not know. For the wildest of the guesses also you cannot guess. So what is better? Better to focus on fetal abnormalities and continue with the answer. Next. What are genetic markers? Discuss the applications and understanding population origin, disease and forefathers. They have given it very clearly. Genetic markers, what are that? 9.6. Your various systems, ABO, HLA, transference, haptoglobins, G6PD, right? Different kinds of systems are existing. Now, mostly this is what is based upon the blood polymorphism. Because blood is seen to be having different kinds of forms when it comes to the genetic composition. All of these are seen to be existing with blood polymorphism. And when you have this blood polymorphism which is existing, most of your genetic markers are based on that. And they are asking you application with respect to what? The origin of population. That means how genetic markers are used in understanding various races. Whenever you are talking about the racial criteria, we divide the racial criteria into 3, my dear. 1, morphological, non-morphological and serological. In serological, what are we using? We are majorly using the genetic markers to understand the racial criteria or the race and racism which is existing. 1. You know, in morphological, you have 2 kinds of things which are existing. One is morphometric, the other one is the morphoscopic system. One is the morphometric and the other one is morphoscopic system which is existing. And based on that, you have hair form, eye color, the body type, all of these are existing, epicanthic fold. Okay. Then they are asking you disease association. That means they are talking about how genetic marker is enabling you to understand what kinds of disease profile or what kind of epidemiology exists. And then the next one is forefathers. That is majorly in understanding genealogy, in understanding the lineage. And especially it is talking about what? Paternity diagnosis. All this is a question they are linking between 9.6 and 12th chapter. In 12th chapter, what is happening? You have forensic, right? You have paternity diagnosis. All of this is being asked in this particular question. You have disease management, right? Now, for some reason, if you observe for last 3 years, they have been continuously asking a question on 9.6. In 22, we had a question. In 24, we had a question. 25, we had a question. Genetic markers have become important for some reason. They have substituted this particular chapter with 9.7. Because every year we used to see a question on 9.7 ecological anthropology. But now what they have done, they have stopped asking questions on that, they started asking questions on 9.6. But anytime very soon, probably next year, we would see a question coming back on 9.7 because there is nothing left in 9.6 to be asked. In 22, they asked HLA. Last year, they asked ABO. This year, they asked what is genetic marker on overall application of 9.6. So, what is going to come next year probably is again the comeback of 9.7 to a larger extent. Okay? Next. The agenda of biological anthropology became more scientific from middle of the 20th century. Justify. What do you write here? The question is appearing very difficult, right? But they are simply asking you the last 3 lines of 12th chapter. Applied human genetics. That is all being asked. Last 3 lines of 12th chapter. And when you go and refer 9.4c, you have something like gene mapping, gene imprinting, right? Genome studies, genetic counseling. What are they saying? They are saying the agenda of biological anthropology became more scientific from the middle of 12th century. They are categorically talking about the new physical anthropology, not old physical anthropology. What is new physical anthropology? Which is dealing with applied human genetics, which is dealing with 9.4c, gene imprinting, genetic counseling, all of those dimensions. And majorly it is focusing on what, my dear? Eugenics, which is nothing but part of the welfare genetics, which as a branch started to develop. You see, welfare genetics will have 3 branches. One is eugenics, euthenics and euphenics. And these 3 are seen to be existing here, and that is what is the centrality of the question being asked here. So it is asking about applications of human genetics, nothing more. Nothing more at all when you talk about this. Because what is physical anthropology all about? Physical anthropology is keeping biology and center and seeing that in reference to what? Culture. Seeing that in reference to what? Society. Seeing that in reference to what? Environment. It is looking at the biological changes and the application with the culture as a determinant, with the society as a determinant, with the environment as a determinant. That is what is being asked. And you should be able to do that. Now again, my dear, this only you would get when you have broader understanding. I am emphasizing categorically, broader understanding is important in writing this. Describe briefly the theoretical perspectives in linguistic anthropology to explain the relationship of culture, language and thought. Beautiful question. Right? And you start writing philosophy here. There is no point. They are simply asking you theoretical perspective, evolutionary perspective, structural perspective, functional perspective, and the narrational perspective. How did the language emerge? Then, what is the structure of the language? You have various branches of linguistic anthropology: historic linguistics, structural linguistics, descriptive linguistics, ethno-linguistics. All of these are what? Branches of linguistics, and that is the theoretical perspective of this. And once you talk about that, they are asking you language, culture, and thought. There is only one hypothesis which is talking about this: Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Sapir-Whorf hypothesis says what? Language is a mental force which is coercing the thought of the human being. It is coercing the thought of the human being. Sapir studies on Hopi and Whorf. And you will have to write a counter narrative to this, because they say language is influencing culture, but you also see culture is influencing language. And that is where I keep talking about a very, very famous concept of what one year William Ludds about, the double speak phenomenon. Double speak William Ludds. And make a passing reference with respect to the social context of language. That means simply write 7th chapter and come. You will get good marks. Are you understanding? So that is with respect to this particular question. It is indirectly asking on Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. Next. How did the study of variation in the forms of marriage lead to rethinking the concept of social reproduction, kinship and family? Right? Question is appearing very difficult again. What are you supposed to do? Forms of marriage led to rethinking the concept of social reproduction, kinship and family. They are simply asking you one, the universality of marriage. They are asking you forms of marriage and rules of marriage. That's all. Because rules of marriage is what is determining social reproduction, kinship and family. What is happening? 3 kinds, 3 rules, 3 laws. What is that? Prescriptive, prohibitive, prospective and prohibitive is one. Prescriptive, preferential. Proscriptive and prohibitive is incest taboo. Preferential marriage and prescriptive marriage. Prescriptive is with respect to whom? Prescriptive is with respect to exogamy, endogamy, isogamy, anisogamy. Anisogamy can be hypergamy, hypogamy. And preferential is what? Cousin marriages and uncle niece marriages. And what is seen to be happening? You have cross cousin marriages and parallel cousin marriages. And what are we supposed to do? How are these determining the reproduction, kinship and family? They are indirectly asking you rules of marriage and nothing else. And link that dimension with what is the management with respect to meeting and mating pattern that is existing in the society. Right? Again, simple, straightforward question which is to be understood here. What are the major theories proposed in evolution of food subsistence economy brings revolution during this period? What are they asking you? They are asking about major theories with respect to origin of food production. Now, did you study about these theories? You would not have. Should you study about these theories? Now, yes. Previously, you would not have. Now, you should. But rather, if you think that you are supposed to attend this question, don't you think I can talk about the Neolithic evolution? Yes, that is where food production has started. I can talk about the theories behind the Mesolithic wild crop collection. Yes. Don't you think I can talk about the Cohen's economic typology, which is talking about the pastoral system, which is talking about agricultural system, which is talking about horticultural system, which is talking about swiddling as a system? Yes. If I want to manage this answer also, I can manage in the exam hall. But you would not have the exactness, but from now on you will have to understand various theories which are seen to be existing with respect to origin of food production. And how did the change in subsistence economy bring revolution during this period? Now, by looking at this, you should get a clue that they are asking about Neolithic revolution. G.V. Child's understanding of Neolithic revolution and what happened in history. What happened with the evolution of food? Settled habitat started, village economy started, pottery started, wheel-made pottery, trade started, surplus started, political system started. All of these have resulted in what? Neolithic period to be referred as Neolithic revolution by G.V. Child. Simple understanding, right? Okay. See, the observation is you know all of them, my dear, but the only question is you don't know where to write what. That is the fundamental challenge that you have when it comes to this paper. Discuss the centrality of African continent in the narrative of human evolution. They are just asking the theories. In theories, what all do we have? Out of Africa theory, continuity theory, regional continuity theory, and we also have partial displacement theory. And you see, all of these theories are categorically talking about what? That out of Africa theory categorically says that the evolution has happened in the African mood out. But these two theories have said that it did not happen in Africa alone, it happened in other parts. That is the regional continuity or the continuity theory and the assimilationist theory or partial displacement theory. Any of this. That is what it is asking about, because you see there are only three theories of origin. It is PYQ. You cannot say it is new question. It is PYQ which is being asked for the third time in last 6 years. And if you did not learn, that is your problem. Right? Next. Right, last set of this question paper. How did the theories of postmodernism relevant in promoting social justice and empowerment of marginalized communities? Never attempt a question like this. I would say never attempt a question like this, because you will end up writing what? GS. Now social justice came, empowerment came, marginalized communities came. You will start talking about scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, women, children, disabled. Right? So rather than that, abstain from attempting, because theories of postmodernism, I am not talking about deconstructionist theory, right? Foucault's theory, I am not at all talking about Derrida's. But the problem here is what? They are asking the application of postmodernism. Asal postmodernism గుర్తుపెట్టుకోవడమే ఎక్కువ. దాని మీద అప్లికేషన్ రాయడం అతి మన వల్ల కాదు. So rather than that, I would say skip some question like this. I would say 8th section is that section which has to be skipped. You cannot select 8th question at all. Now you see, genome-wide disease association studies, advanced our understanding of health and disease. Discuss. First of all, you will not know what is this, right? Even if you try to approximate and anticipate, what are they asking you? They are talking about how genome studies are promoting health and managing disease. Now that means, again, applied human genetics to a larger extent, where you see the role of rDNA technology, where the role of genetic counseling, where the role of genome mapping, all of this is there. But the problem is, what am I doing? Am I writing it exactly or am I assuming it? I am assuming it. I don't have exactness when I am writing, because I never came across these studies before. And the last question is, examine the utility of human remains in forensic analysis. That's a straightforward question. In any forensic, what do? You fundamentally have, in forensic, you see skeletal reconstruction and you see mathematical reconstruction or statistical reconstruction. In skeletal reconstruction, you will talk about the bones, you will talk about the stature, you will talk about various metrics which are existing majorly, whatever you are coming about or whatever you are talking about, measurements. And you also see in forensic, you would look at different methodologies existing for live bodies and dead bodies. It might be with respect to the methodology of calculating cranial index versus cephalic index, the stature calculation, the pelvic region, right, the teeth analysis or the dental analysis that is being done, right, or that is seen with respect to the bone or the osteo analysis which is existing. Now, what is seen to be happening? This is a simple question, but top two questions are definitely tough, and those are the questions which should be skipped. Right? So what could have been a good choice in this paper is leaving 8th question. And other question should have been 5th. You should have also left the second question. What was second question? Miocene hominoids. We don't know. Second question should have been left there. And 8th question should have been left. And rest choices 3 and 4 here, 6 and 7 here. You will have to choose between these 4. Right? Because I know 20 markers are not very strong in these two papers. Because what should be your first choice? Your first choice is Wherever you have good 20 marker, wherever you have one good 15 marker and one average 15 marker. Or one good 20 marker, one average, two average 15 markers. Or two good 15 markers but average 20 marker. This should be your priority of choice. Good 20 marker, good 15 marker, average 15 marker. Good 20 marker, average 15 marker, average 15 marker. Good 15 markers, average 20 marker. Priority first this, second this, third this. Right? Any given day, that should have been your choice when you look at this. Right? We will quickly run through paper 2 because I didn't want to spend much time on paper 2. That's very straight. Paper 2 was easy. I would say it's very simple if you have covered your syllabus. If you have covered a broader understanding, it is all straight, simple that could be learned in paper 2. Nothing much, we'll quickly run through paper 2. Sonian cultural tradition is all about what material it is asking about? Paleolithic cultures. Very simple, right? Straightforward. Caste domination, factionalism and political power. Majorly they are talking about whom? Majorly they are talking about whom? Casteization of politics and politicization of caste. Rajni Kotaris. Right? That is what is being spoken here. You can talk about even Ghanshyam Shah's understanding of caste and politics. Right? Or you can also talk about Deepankar Gupta's understanding of the caste system or the muddled hierarchies which are existing. Any of these three could be spoken. Then, regionalism and autonomy. Now, majorly, what are the studies that we see with regionalism? Regionalism, you know that it is majorly on what? Ethnic conflict. Right? Majorly it is ethnic conflict that is existing. Why? Ethnicity could be regionalism also. And in the ethnic dimension, we see there are two aspects. One is the primordial approach, the other one is the instrumental approach. Primordial approach given by Clifford Gibbs and instrumental approach given by Frederick Barth. And you see, region is being used as an instrument to propagate ethnicity. That is the core understanding of regionalism. And whose all studies that you will have to see, one is M.N. Srinivas, the other one is the V.K. Srivastav's understanding of regionalism and autonomy. You can discuss. Because there are different bases of regionalism which are supposed to be spoken here. Right? And what are they fighting for? They are fighting for autonomy. That could be the northeastern region, that could be the central region, that could be northern region. Anywhere you have this particular discussion going on. Right? So again, a simple straightforward question. Where your relevance philosophy with respect to Arunachal Pradesh? Majorly what? You see the northeastern frontier area. That is where his research has been done. And you also see he is majorly known for understanding the tribal developmental policies. Initially, you see the isolationist policy was given by Verrier-Elwin. And later on, it got developed into the integrationist approach. And Verrier-Elwin was made part of the Tribal Welfare Committee. Elwin Committee is there. With respect to what? Development in the tribal section. So all of those were supposed to be spoken here. Because he has also written an ethnographic fieldwork with respect to the northeastern tribe. Right? So that is to be written here. Then, characteristics and communication between little tradition and great tradition. What are they asking you? They are simply asking about what is little tradition, what is great tradition. What is little tradition? That tradition which is of illiterate, that tradition which is folk, that tradition which is primitive, that tradition which is unwritten. But whereas great tradition is what? That tradition which is written, which is of the urban culture, which is civilized, which is growing. And what is seen to be happening, we constantly see there is an interplay of little tradition and great tradition. And this is what is called as universalization and this is what is called as parochialization. And when you look at the mechanism that is seen to be existing, sometimes it could be a unilinear transition which is seen to be existing, and that is what is called as orthogenic process of transition or orthogenic process of interplay between little and great. And there is also heterogenic process where the little tradition and great tradition, not a unilinear, but there are different branches of it which are emerging. This is unilinear, these are different branches. So we see heterogenic movement or heterogenic transition that is seen to be happening with respect to the little tradition and great tradition. Right? So that should have been written here. Paleo-anthropological significance of Shivaliks. Ramapithecus, Shivapithecus, those were supposed to be written. And you can also include Neogene primates. 2023 question. Neogene primates was part of Shivalik hills, and you can definitely bring in this particular question here. Next. Again, straightforward, very expected question. Sarkar and Risley, right? Sarkar and Risley, the demographic characteristic feature differences. And majorly you will have to talk about the Negrito element conflict which is exist. Because the major conflict was the Negrito element. One said Negrito element is there in India, one said it is not there in India. What is the evidence they have given? They have given certain tribes in the Tamil Nadu, they have given certain tribes in Gujarat, certain tribes in Karnataka, for example, Siddhis. Siddhis say they have a Negrito element which is present. So that was what was given here. Next. Impact of Christianity. Right, I don't want to discuss at all because all these are very simple, straightforward questions. There is no much of value addition that I can do to you when you are writing these answers. Describe the distinctive upper Paleolithic cultures, right? Simple, this thing is what? What is the time period? What is the environmental condition? What is the distribution? What are the characteristic features? What is the significance? Simple. And what is the true tradition that has been existing in this time period? Next, environmental and biocultural impacting the health. 6.2, straight away simple question. Always remember, whenever you are writing 6.2, start off by talking about all of the problems of tribes is because of tribe, non-tribe contact. You write this line, examiner understands that you know this problem. Because all of your 6.2 and 6.3 is majorly infused by whom? Non-tribe interacting with the tribal population, be it the land alienation, be it the health problems, be it the money lending, whatever, all of these issues are being brought in because of this core interaction and bring in the dimension in the starting itself. Highlight the contributions of B.S. Guha, Iravati Karve and S.R.K. Chopra. Nobody knows S.R.K. Chopra. Right? Now if somebody comes out and tells that I have taught S.R.K. Chopra, that is bogus. Nobody knows S.R.K. Chopra. Right? Iravati Karve, yes. Guha, yes. This is the PYQ. This is the PYQ which was asked in 2022. They have simply added one extra person, S.R.K. Chopra. You can read about S.R.K. Chopra in this particular answers. Right? Next. Different types of caste mobility in India highlight various factors responsible for it. What are the different factors for caste mobility? Different types of caste mobility. You majorly see these aspects of Sanskritization, Westernization, modernization. All of these are what talking about caste mobility, right? Depeasantization, tribalization, detribalization. All of these are what seem to be existing as a dynamic with respect to caste mobility. What are the factors responsible? The indigenous and exogenous factors which are responsible. Right? Some factors from outside, some factors from within the country which are responsible for that, and you can definitely mention about that. Okay. It is simply asking about 5.3 in combination with 3.2. 3.2 caste mobility, 5.3 indigenous and exogenous factors. Club both of them and write. That is what is supposed to be written in this answer. Next. I think there was one question with respect to population, I think this question. Role of demographic and social factors for population growth. Don't write GS answers. Link the demographic theories of paper 1 here. You have demographic theories of paper 1. Bring in those theories of paper 1 of demographics into this particular area. Don't simply write your GS answer here, please again. Because in paper 1, we study about the biological theories, the social theories, economic theories, cultural theories, Thomas Doubleday, right, De Castro, Easterlin, all of these are what different theories that you study. Bring in that dimension whenever you are writing this answer. Next. Critically examine the concept of scheduled tribe and mention the limitations of administrators' criteria. Right? We talk about various criteria which is spoken for scheduled tribes. What is the major criteria? The major criteria is with respect to what? The primitiveness, right? Isolation, geographical isolation, the cultural distinctiveness which is existing, and not only that, these are pre-economic societies. Now, these are the 4 or 5 which are seen to be existing. And once you talk about this characteristic features of scheduled tribe, you will have to criticize each of those factors. Because is it all-inclusive criteria? No. It is not all-inclusive criteria because the criteria for PVTGs will change. The criteria for denotified tribes will change. The understanding of indigenous communities will change. And what did we see? If some criteria of the scheduled tribe was being met, the non-tribe was gaining the status of the tribal population. And that is nothing but pseudo-tribalism. The pseudo-tribalistic tendencies were seen to be existing, and that's a criticism. What is happening with respect to the Pala-Ikri caste? What is happening with respect to Erikola? Some people are trying to emulate the practices of these communities, and they are gaining what they are gaining? The scheduled tribe status. And that means pseudo-tribalism is the biggest counter which is seen to be existing with respect to the criteria that is considered for scheduled tribes in India. Next, impact of urbanization and industrialization. Straight, simple question again. Taxonomical status of Ramapithecus, it is categorical, again repeated. 2023 was there, 2019 we had a question, 2021 we had a question on Ramapithecus and the phylogeny. Very important dimension, and again state tribalism and pseudo-tribalism. Varnashrama and its contemporary relevance. What is happening in contemporary relevance? In Varnashrama, you see sannyasi or sannyasa as a factor is seen to be declining. And which factor is gaining importance? Grihastha as a factor is gaining importance. And do we still have the relevance of Rina or the social obligation here? There is no relevance of Rina. Right? So bring in this, you will have to bring in the Pandrinath's study of understanding the contemporary relevance of Varnashrama Dharma. We have a person by name Pandrinath. And he has done a lot of studies with respect to the contemporary relevance of these. We should have bring in those particular dimensions. Next. Local dockyard and international trade relation. अब लोग लिख ले यार. Nothing, not very difficult. Village was merely a place where people lived. It had a design which reflected the basic values of Indian civilization. What is it asking? Village system. There are 3 understandings. One is the colonial understanding. One is the nationalist understanding. One is the contemporary understanding. In the nationalist understanding also, we see that somebody believed in village is a self-dependent system. And somebody believed village is an interdependent system. And somebody believed that village is a reflection of Indian social values. But somebody believed that no, village is not alone the reflection of Indian social system which is existing. They are categorically asking you about the nationalistic perspective of village. Because you remember one small cheat code that I can tell you when you are preparing for paper 2, very simple, my dear. You see, caste studies are of 3 types again. One, with respect to the book view. Whatever Gure has done, whatever Louis Dumont has done, that is book view. There is field view of caste, whatever M.N. Srinivas has done, that is field view. And there are contemporary view of caste and contemporary view of caste. Somebody accepted caste system, somebody contradicted caste system. These are the perspectives of caste. Whole of your caste studies is centered around this. When you look at village system, somebody said it is self-dependent, somebody said it is interdependent. Right? We see again the colonialist, the nationalist and the contemporary perspective of village. When you look at tribal studies, Again, one dimension is tribal studies of the colonials, tribal studies of the anthropologists, and the tribal studies which are seen to be existing in the contemporary. The Indian anthropologist perspective of tribal studies. That should be, again, what? This is majorly narrow perspective. This is what? Academic perspective. This is what? Inclusive perspective. And what is happening in inclusive perspective? You see, there are three methods of development. One method of development is what? Isolationist view, assimilationist view, and the third one is integrationist view. And mostly the integrationist perspective is what you see with respect to the contemporary. And that is what is seen to be existing here. Okay. You always remember all of your studies are dependent upon these dynamics, right? Village, right? Last 5 minutes, nothing more to discuss. Discuss the role of NGOs in socio-economic, political of weaker sections and the manner they facilitate other stakeholders. Weaker sections should be considered with respect to whom, my dear? Now, don't consider women and all, because that is not part of your syllabus. Consider scheduled caste, scheduled tribe, and OBCs if you want religious and linguistic minorities, because these are part of your syllabus. Don't be moved away by general studies answer here. And definitely talk about what? The Roy Berman's understanding of NGO in development. Discuss about those dynamics, and all that you will have to write in this answer is what? Examples mostly. Okay. Trace the history and describe the methods of formulating the list of OBC, both that GS answer. Right? There is no anthropology in this. Straight away they are asking you how are you identifying the list, and both at the state and the national level, and they are asking you what? History. From Kaka Kalelkar committees and all, from there you will have to bring in. Okay. Now that is mostly to do with general studies. You know it, you know it, you don't know it, you don't know it. Identify contemporary limitations in process of development. How can anthropology? That means they are simply asking you the comparison of the three methods of tribal development. Right? And they are asking about what are the challenges that are existing in these methods. And they are asking you how is anthropology going to promote tribal development? How is it promoting tribal development in policy formulation, tribal development with respect to policy implementation, and tribal development with respect to what? With respect to the execution and monitoring. You have anthropology acting at each stage, right? You will discuss about that. Again, definitely conclude with whom? Definitely conclude with Roy Berman again. Next. Discuss the rising ethnic conflicts in India and propose their possible remedial measures. Now again, whenever we see ethnic conflicts, you will have to bring in the aspects of ethnicity. Ethnicity is talking about two things. One is, I am not talking about the third perspective of ethnicity. One is the primordial, instrumental, and constructionist. We have constructionist perspective which is existing. This is not very famous today. But rather we see primordial and instrumental approaches which are present for ethnicity. Now from there what is seen to be happening when the ethnic identity is not meeting with the other, automatically what is seen to be happening? We have ethnic conflict. What is paper one concept that you can bring in? You can bring in the ethnocentric understanding. When you say my identity is larger, when I say my identity is bigger and my group is superior, that is where we see ethnic conflicts emerging. And ethnic conflicts could be on what? Could be on the basis of language, could be on the basis of region, could be on the basis of religion, could be on the basis with respect to the tribal population of the tribal identity. It could be on the basis of race. All of these are what? Ethnic identities. You can have various bases for ethnic identity, and any conflict of identity will result in what? Ethnic conflict. And then discuss about probable remedial measures. Remedial measures here majorly with respect to what? General studies again. Right? That you can bring in anthropological perspective. Regionalism is an ethnic conflict. Communalism is an ethnic conflict. Linguistic conflicts are ethnic conflicts. Tribal conflicts are ethnic conflicts. Racial conflicts are ethnic conflicts. All these are ethnic conflicts. Bring in anthropological perspective. Here you write simple general answer that you can see. Next, critically evaluate the concept of nation state. 8.2, tribe nation state, and look at the variation. I always keep telling for the chapter. Whenever you see the chapter, see 5 different countries. One is USA, the other one is Russia, the other one is Australia, the other one is Africa, then simply India. If you wish to have a buffer with China. What are you supposed to see? Each of this country, how are they treating and what is their consideration of indigenous communities? You are able to do this, the chapter is easy. Otherwise, it's very confusing. Choose these 6 countries because you always know what is India's consideration on indigenous societies. Other societies you will just have to make. You will see what is their understanding of indigenous, what are the welfare mechanisms that are existing for that indigenous community. Okay? Next. Describe the nature of traditional, again, tribes in Nilgiri. This is more to do with the reciprocity that you study in 3rd chapter, Economic Anthro, paper 1. There you study this example, that is what you are supposed to write here. But writing this for a 20 marker, it is tough. Like writing this for a 20 marker, it is definitely tough. Next. Define minority, elaborate the patterns of linguistic and very simple. What are they asking? What is minority? Is what is seen, you see section 2C. Right? Section 2C of Minorities Act is what is defining minority. And then talk about what is the criteria of linguistic minority and religious minorities. And once you discuss about the issues and discuss about the measures to be taken for tackling those issues. Right? Next. In fact, the last question of paper 2. PVTGs and welfare mechanism. Is this clear? Paper 2 was very simple. One thing that you had to have in paper 2 was strong notes. Thinkers, interlinkage. You had this in paper 2 was easy. Paper 1 was also conceptual. It was not tough. The problem with people is when you have this rigid understanding, it is tough. But when you have this broader, I deciphered the questions to you in front of you. That means all of this you understood in a different manner, but you were supposed to have an holistic understanding. When you have holistic understanding, it's easy. So what is the thing that you need to take away from paper 1 and paper 2? Continue as it is, but don't depend too much on toppers' notes. And don't depend too much on ready-made material. I would always tell you, have broader understanding and very good grip on what, my dear? Syllabus. Right? So that is it from my side. There is a specific link to register for these model answers. Right? You can register and you can definitely download from there the model answers for 2025 paper 1 as well as paper 2. These are given very elaborately. Right? You can pick them up. Right? So that is it from my side. Hope you learned something. Thank you.